If I had a world of my own, everything would be nonsense. Nothing would be what it is, because everything would be what it isn't. And contrary-wise, what it is, it wouldn't be. And what it wouldn't be, it would. You see? Hi friends, and welcome back to Cammy's Corner and another installment of Harrowing Horror. It was that thought process that started this entire journey. I received House of Leaves as a gift back in 2000 as a Christmas present from my mother because she said that she had heard it was much like Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. She doesn't know how wrong she was. Similar in the sense of nonsense, but such a mind warp. To say I don't have a lot to say is an understatement, so let's just jump right into it. So, House of Leaves by Mark D. Danielewski. It's a psychological horror. It consists of 3 different storylines that are all intertwined, told by a different person. I think it would stand to reason, for lack of a better word, with this book, that this entire novel calls into question the understanding of the understanding. Are we really truly ever to know everything? Or do we even know anything at all? This is a psychological horror for that very reason. Your mind is always spinning. Just when you think you've got it down, just when you think you've touched on all the characters, all the concepts, then something somewhere throws you for a loop. During the process of reading this, I feel bad. Stacy, I owe you an apology because I really should have been reading it at your speed, because she kept, asking me, are you done? What page are you on? And I really think she just needed someone to vent to. I can honestly say that after I finished reading this book, I needed to have just a couple of days to kind of process everything and just ask myself, what the hell did I just read? It's not scary. It's not gory. It's not, and despite the fact that there's things that happen in the book that definitely constitute it as a horror novel, but it's just a mind boggle. It's a mind warp. As Stacy put it, it is a mind. And I don't disagree with her. Paul from Paul Reads also reached out during his reading process, and he said that he felt all of the extras were very unnecessary. That he felt that they were a distraction from the story. Had the author just left all that out, he said that standalone, it would have been a great story. I have to disagree, although I'll admit, Paul, I was right there with you at the beginning. And I don't know if any of you were like me, but I would say it took me I was about 96 pages in before I really felt like I had it down enough where I could just read. I walked away from this after reading like 10 pages. I would read and I'd be like, okay, that's enough. I gotta brain break. And then I would come back and I would revisit it. After, I would say, about 120 pages, I was flowing. I just couldn't put it down because I'm like, okay, what's going on? Where am I at? How is this happening? And you really have to pay attention. You have to be able to kind of read through the material. And I guess at 120 plus pages, I was kind of in a rhythm where I was identifying the font that the author was using to kind of differentiate the stories. So it really truly did help the whole process. Now, before we get into great detail about the story, let me point out something for you real quick. So we have our cover page here, and the cover is black. One of the first things that you should have noticed is the word house appears in the color blue. Now I do want to apologize in advance if you're colorblind. And colorblindness is a real thing. 1 in every 12 men suffer from colorblindness, and 1 in every 200 women. It is a legal form of blindness. The reason I bring that up is because with color blindness, there's 3 distinct hues that you cannot see. That is the color blue, the color green, and the color red. So why the color blue then? Well, according to our author Danielewski, the color blue is in part from his experience with filmmaking. And filmmaking obviously makes its debut in this book. And when you're juxtaposing images in filmmaking and you're kind of dovetailing them to make a flawless image, there's a thing called a chroma key. And the chroma key is done in post-production, and it's a technique for composing those 2 images, so kind of mirroring them together to give you that flawless image. Now the color blue and the color green are often the hues that are used because those are the 2 colors that pop off of human skin. You would be able to very much see human form in front of those colors. Hence a green screen. A green screen, when you're standing in front of it, the human form stands out and you're able to go ahead and mirror or bleed in those images. So just a little fun fact. But every time the word house then appears in the book, you will see it in the color blue. But of course, like I said, if you don't have that ability, I apologize, because it is kind of a really cool thing to see. So the book was published in March of 2000. It has 2 places of origin that are mentioned in the book. You have Hollywood, California, and then you have the Virginia countryside. There is a brief mention toward the end of the book as Johnny is traveling Flagstaff, Arizona, but California and Virginia are obviously our 2 very distinct bases. The point of view of this story, in my personal opinion, takes place at all 3 points of view. You have first person point of view, where Johnny is your narrator. He's telling you a story. Then you have the second person point of view, kind of about, I would say maybe about 30 pages in. When he starts talking, he's almost talking to you. At least that's how I felt. He's almost telling you what you should be thinking, how you should be thinking, how you should be processing the information. And you kind of start to feel for a moment that you're a part of the story. So that was a really ingenious way, I feel, that Mark put us inside the book and made us feel like we're part of the process. And then the entire novel, for lack of a better word, is a complete record telling of events, because you have these 3 stories, these 3 lives that, although are very different, somehow manage to intertwine. Now, if you are interested in viewing the actual film, there is a documentary that was composed by, I'm assuming, a fan, because it's not endorsed in any way by Danielewski or his team. And you can catch it on YouTube. It's a 4-part series. It's longer than what Karen mentions in the book, though, because Karen does say that in order to captivate her audience, she kind of condensed the Navidson record to a 13-minute film. So these 4 films are a little over 30 minutes, and they're called just that, the Navidson record, and you can catch them in the 4 parts. They did stay true to what the film type would be, so it's kind of an older, it almost has kind of like a skipping ability to it, like a rough hue. It reminded me of the Wonder Years, if you're familiar with that show from the 80s, you know, where it kind of starts off in that rough edging. So they did keep true to the explanation in the story, but it doesn't at all cover remotely a fraction of what the Navidson record is all about. But you do kind of get a little bit of a visualization of what that millimeter film would have looked like if we were able to actually view the film in question. Now, it does also state in the book that Karen, Tom, Reston, Navidson, none of them appear on film. So that's where you're going to see the difference of variation on the Navidson record through YouTube, because each character does very much appear on film, and they kind of even have some narration. And that wasn't, I mean, you do hear they say that it was narrated, but not like an interview type of thing, not like a real world, an MTV Real World kind of sit down where you're in a box and you're talking, and they kind of make it that way. It, I guess, kind of gives a little bit more human element to this. The book in and of itself is a psychological horror book. It is an absolute mind cluster. So in addition to not only dealing with your own personal psyche, if you were able to kind of get more familiarized with each one of the characters very much has a psychological disorder in some way, shape, or form. Some are more severe than others, but psychological disorders in and of itself are a prodigy of two sustaining environments. So you have a environmental cause and effect, and then you also have a genetic or biological disposition. So when those two complex factors interact, that's what creates a psychological disorder. So if it's biological, it's obviously due to genetics, it's due to a sustained injury that you might have, substance abuse, and we see with our narrator, he's got severe substance abuse on every level, or just your overall cognitive style, and that's how you interact and learn, how you obtain knowledge, how your thoughts work, and also how you experience things through your senses, through touch, through smell. If it's an environmental stimuli for a psychological disorder, that is a prodigy of your, for the exact term, your environment. So it's either because you are malnourished, and malnourishment sometimes causes hallucinations, it causes you to be skittish or fearful, it causes anxiety. Any kind of exposure to a toxin or a chemical, if you're extremely stressed and in a constant stressful environment, also if you are subjected to it through abuse, or if you are in like a war-torn area or had a war experience where it caused like a post-traumatic stress disorder, those are all contributing factors of psychological disorders. So with Johnny, he was abandoned at a very early age. His mom was taken from him at the age of 7 for his own safety. She was institutionalized because she attempted to murder him for his own safety, as she said. His father shortly after that passed away. So around the age of 12, he was sent into foster care, and from there his life just became more of a revenge mechanism. He suffered from all facets of substance abuse, from you know, pill ingestion to marijuana, alcoholism, and he was very much addicted to sex, and that's laden throughout his friend as well, Lude. Stacy also made a really interesting comment to me that she thinks that his name may have kind of derived from a quaalude, and I thought that was kind of cool. You know, maybe that was what Danielewski was thinking, giving him kind of a drug-induced name. But Lude, who was his only friend and confidant, was no better. It's like they used women to somehow not only fill their pleasurable desires or their earthly desires, but it was a source of entertainment for them. It was at one point you even see like a calendar that Lude had, I think he verbalized it to Johnny, but Johnny had written it down so he could kind of go back and review it. And then he did like a comparison contrast of 30 days in the month of November of the number of women that they slept with and the events on how it happened. So you have a lot of play on sexual connotation in this book. But beyond the early departure of his parents and the substance abuse, he didn't really have a good sense of self. He was just very down on himself from the beginning. He just kind of had that I don't give a crap attitude, and anything he did, any embarking that he had, where it was a drug or a sexual encounter, he immediately felt remorse. Like, he knew it was wrong before he even did it, but he did it anyways to fill that need, that urge, that desire to be with someone or to be around someone or just to not be alone. And immediately after it was completed, he looked back on it just feeling disgusted with himself. As he kind of starts to get more involved in the Davidson record and kind of divulges into that, there's a written understanding that that story was somehow kind of making his environment similar to the environment that he was reading about. I don't think it was so much that the story was that captivating, that it had that kind of a stronghold, but it's been stated many times, if you place yourself in an environment, a positive environment begets positive results. A negative environment begets negative results. So if you're constantly feeding your environment, your personal space, with bad imagery, bad thoughts, you know, harsh music, drugs, sex, all of these things that by nature bring you to a level of id, you're going to start believing the things that you're reading and hearing and seeing. So he wasn't in a solid state of mind to begin with, and his mental health declined over the course of this 2-year period. And this story didn't help, because this story in and of itself was a decline of 2 people who also suffered from psychological disorders. Zampano, which was the 80-year-old blind writer of the Davidson record, passed away early on in the introduction. Johnny acquires his apartment because he is in the process of looking for a place. Lou tells him, hey, there's a guy in my apartment complex who's old and is about to die, which I found very weird. How did he know prior to Zampano's death that Zampano was gonna die? Did he just make the assumption because he was old that he was ready to go, or was he privy to some kind of information? Again, I don't think that we are intended to fill in all the pieces. I think that's part of this psychological puzzle that Danielewski has created. Through Johnny's encounters, everywhere else he embarks, where he works, who he lusts after, these are all very dark, dangerous people. So no matter where he turns, he doesn't have a positive outlet. The woman that he is, as he states a couple of times, in love with, but he's not even really sure that he is a stripper who's 6 years older than him, and she doesn't even really appear at any point in the story to really be attracted to him. She doesn't really give any advances or any idea that she wants to be in a relationship with him, but yet that's always his go-to. And I think it's more of a mental imagery for him as he continues to embark on all these different sexual encounters with this multitudes of women, and I mean, to say it's hundreds would be an understatement. He always alludes back to her and the way she looks and who she is, but I don't really think it's ever about her. I think this entire image that he's created in his mind is, again, just to keep him focused. It's like a rabbit with a carrot, you know. As long as I have a focal point to come back to, then I will bring myself back there. It's kind of like a way for him to pull himself out of whatever dark hole he crawled in. But when he finally has the opportunity to what appears to be in a real relationship with her, he's so far gone at that point. Not only is he malnourished, but he's so gone in his own head, he doesn't even want anything to do with her. So he writes her off, basically. He's just like, that was my one shot and I didn't even take it, but I don't even want it anymore. I just want all of this to end. His mom, who is later referred to as just simply P, she, of course, as I stated, is institutionalized at a very young age. She starts to believe that he is in danger, so she thinks the best way to handle that situation is to end his life. His father, of course, interjects, comes between them, and she gets institutionalized, but he's told that he really shouldn't have a relationship with his mom. Well, come to find out, the entire time that she's been institutionalized, she's been writing him letters. So if you are interested in carrying on with those letters, the same year of publication for this book, which was in 2000, Danielewski also released a publication called the Wellstow Letters, which Wellstow, of course, as you know from the book, is the name of the mental institution that she was in. And it is comprised of letters going back and forth between Johnny and his mom between 1982 and I believe 1989. And it's supposed to answer some questions. You do get a taste, I guess, if you will, in this book, because there is a few letters that are given to us here. And there is quite a few different ways that the author puts this book together. I mean, beyond the footnotes, beyond the music bars, you have different fonts, you have upside down and side to side, you have in some cases just a single letter on a page. So I think, you know, with that all plays again into your psyche. As you get deeper into this novel, as things are not really making sense, neither is the wording. The wording kind of goes with that. So it's a really interesting evolution. With Johnny, with everything, you know, that I had mentioned, you know, his substance abuse, his parental issues, his self-imagery, he also, as the story goes on, you continue to see also an isolation with him. He doesn't want to be around anybody. He doesn't have a zest for life. He even gets to the point where he becomes so isolated that he loses his job because he doesn't even have the wherewithal to leave the house every day. And all he wants to do is just piece this story together. Zampano, who I've already lightly touched on, is the 80-year-old blind writer, and his creation is the Davidson record, which is a manuscript that is eventually the development of this documentary of Will and Karen and all of the other counterparts there. Zampano is a very curious character in the sense that we don't really know if Zampano is his real name. We don't know much about his history. Is it a pen name, a surname? Where does he come from? You know, there's not a lot of history given on him. He is labeled as an eccentric person. He obviously has quirks, and as I mentioned, all the characters in this book possess some type of psychological disorder, and Zampano is no different. He has what they call graphomania, and graphomania is an obsessive compulsive impulse to write, and he writes on everything. And we find this through Johnny, who, as I said, takes over his apartment. He doesn't discover this manuscript right away. This is something that is kind of announced to him in a very dark, diluted way in the middle of the night. It's like 3 a.m. and he discovers the Davidson record, which he claims changes his entire existence. When he stumbles across this manuscript, it is in pieces. It's not at all in its whole entirety. And he discovers a multitude of various things that have been written on envelopes, obviously paper, milk cartons. I think there was even a mention of there was writing on the back of a stamp. So the pictures that you see at the end of this book are kind of like a imagery of what he was piecing together. Now, the actual title of this book, House of Leaves, when we think of leaves, we think of a pile of leaves. We think of shapes and colors and sizes of differentiation. Leaves in the sense of book terminology, can also mean paper, stacks of paper. So the thought process behind this title is because he is a compulsive writer and he's written so much on so many things, this is like a pile of papers that Johnny, in essence, puts together and creates this manuscript, this novel, this thing that he sells. And that is how it is listed at the beginning of the introduction of this book. Whoever finds this, I bestow this upon you, and may it bring you great wealth and riches. Clearly the book does something very different, but it does bring success of sorts to Will and Karen. So let's kind of take our focus off of Zampano for a second and jump into the Davidson record. So we kind of ask ourselves as we're reading this book, is this a story that Zampano just created in his head, or are these actual people that he knew? You know, did this really occur? Because we know future forward that it's made into a film. So there's a lot of questions surrounding that in and of itself. So you have this toggle back and forth between Johnny's story, the development of what's going on with him and his life, and then you have this Davidson record, which we're seeing a development of a different family. So we have Will, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalist who has his own psychological warfare going on. He's got a feeling of abandonment, not only from his parents, he has substance abuse issues. He also has a estranged brother who we meet in this portion of the novel. His name is Tom. Tom is a carpenter who has substance abuse issues. He is not able to hold a job for very long. He's not able to hold relationships for very long. To the understanding, they've been out of communication for about 6 years. So you do see that there's not a lot of stability with both Will nor Tom. Then you have Karen. Karen is an ex-supermodel, now mother of 2, mother of Chad, who's 8, Daisy, who's 5, and she's coming to the realization that this is now her life. She used to be big-time city model and the life of the party, and now she's got the anxiety and apprehension of the supermodel syndrome. She's growing older. She doesn't want to, you know, just be this mom, you know. She's not sure what she is. It's not that she has any resentment towards her children. It's very clear that she loves her children, but you do see a few incidences within the book where she's by herself with the kids, and it's like she's not fully there. Her mind is wandering. There's a point where she's looking out the window and it's very apparent the cars passing by are a distraction. She kind of tunes the kids out for a second. And there's also a glimpse of codependency with Will, because every time she is alone with the children, it's a craving that she has almost, with wanting him there, needing him there, when in actuality she really doesn't want anything to do with him. It's more of a controlling environment for her, you know, just having him around. There's also some psychological warfare going on inside her own head. She was sexually assaulted by a family member at a very young age. She was also a witness to a sexual assault by the same family member upon her sister. When the sexual assault and trauma was occurring on her sister, she was then taken to be hidden, so I guess she didn't view the traumatic event, and stuffed into a water well. This caused her to become claustrophobic, which we touch on in the story. So there's actually a lot of things going on in Karen's head, not all of which are laid out perfectly, but we do know that there's some thoughts going on in her head. And we have to understand too, when someone has that much psychological warfare that they're dealing with on a daily basis, especially when it comes to sexual trauma, the last thing they want is to be physically intimate with someone. Not to say that it was Will's fault, not to say that he's not privy to what happened and he tries everything in his power to connect them or to be connected to her, but they have their issues in and of themselves. You know, they've had an on again, off again relationship for the last 11 years. He even said at one point in the book that, you know, people are destined to be together. He feels that they were brought together, but they're not meant to be. This to me, again, is an example of codependency, because here you have two people who love each other, yes, but do they love each other because of who they are for each other, or because they had kids together? And are they in it to salvage the relationship because of time vested, or because they have kids, or do they really truly have feelings for each other? Side note, there was a fan or a reader of the book that had a conversation with the author, Danielewski, and said, you know, I just got done reading your book, and this is not a horror novel. This is actually a romance story. And that kind of took me aback, because if your definition of a romance novel is this, then you yourself have had really bad examples of relationships over time. This is not a romance novel. So we, you know, flash forward to the end of the story where there's a rescue of sorts. You know, Karen takes on her own phobia, and she goes back into the house and she takes on her claustrophobic feelings and goes inside this closet to save, well, she calls him Navy, and she goes inside to save him. But I don't think she saves him for the intensive purposes of love. She goes inside for selfish reasons once again, because to her, as she kind of thinks back on all of this development that's happened between her and him, does she love him? Yes. Does she say that? Yes. She vocalizes that. But she realizes that she's kind of made this happen. She's put him in this position where he's felt a falling out of love with her, because he's tried to be intimate, he's tried to be affectionate, he's tried to be understanding and nurturing more than anybody else in her life, but she just continually uses that as an excuse to push him away. And you can only push someone away for so long, and then at which point, no matter how much they love you, it's going to affect them. She's also been labeled as not so much an adulterer, but they do indicate multiple times infidelity. So we do see a development of a relationship between her and Wax, but it's not even really anything to write home about. It's almost like she's doing it because she can, because she sees that he's flirting with her, and she kind of in essence maybe wants to make Will jealous. So you have this house that is built in 1720. They purchased this home with, to me, what I think Will is doing as a last-ditch kind of effort to salvage the relationship, to see if they can make this work. He wants to create this documentary to kind of just showcase normalcy, what it's like to move into a new home and learn how to function as a family, whatever that means. He takes on some blueprints as he makes a discovery of a closet that is not in this blueprint. Now the closet starts out very small, but it's still odd because one, it's not in these plans, and two, upon opening it, he realizes that it leads nowhere. It's just a black abyss. He videotapes and photographs this to show that what should be the depth of the closet should appear on the outside of the house does not. So then that takes him to want to discover the measurements of the home and compare it to the blueprints, and he discovers that the house is 1/4 of an inch bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and it continues to grow. And as this growth continues to happen, there's still no indication of it from the outside. So that's how, when he calls in the others, and the others consist of his brother Tom, Billy Reston. Reston is an engineer. He's a friend of Will's. He had a freak accident which caused him to be wheelchair bound. Of all the characters, I would say he's the least to have a psychological disorder, but there's still some psychological warfare in his head. Very mild. Any type of injury or results of an injury that causes one to think back on that, you're going to have flashbacks. It's going to take you back to that moment that it happened. So for him, it's just a rejuvenation of life. He is so thankful that he's here, and every time he looks back on the incident or has a memory of it, he just stops and he's so grateful to be in the now. So he's kind of the positive ray of light in this whole story. And then you have Holloway, and Holloway is an experienced explorer that they bring in simply for his background in exploration. So they want him to go down through this closet, and I say down because there's a transcendence of stairs and so forth that's discussed, and they want him to just kind of explore this. So it starts out fairly innocent, and during these explorations, which inevitably over the course of the novel there's a total of 5, the first 2 are nothing to write home about. The first one takes about an hour, the second one is the following day, it takes about 8 hours, and then by the third, that's when you start to notice people are making different observations. The third lasts almost 20 hours. It takes them 45 minutes to reach this staircase, and each time they transcend, it seems to take them longer to come out of this. So it takes them 11 hours this third time to make their way out of the closet. And all the men, when they come back this time around, which refers to Jed and Holloway and Reston, Will is down there, Tom is down there, they all come back cold, depleted, very tired, very worn. And this continues to progressively get worse as they continue to explore this. But they only continue to go down there because they are fascinated by the fact of the ever-changing movement. So with the house, it's a product of the psychological agonies of the people that are in it. Whether they are inhabitants of the home and they're actual homeowners, or if it's just people that visit the house. So in this case, you have all of these people who are trying to get to the bottom of why this closet exists, and they're all going through their own issues within their head. So the house, I don't think is haunted. The house is not evil. The house simply preys on these weaknesses. They say you will things. You will them into action, whether they be positive or negative. You can will yourself into good health, or polar opposite. You can will yourself into believing you're sick and you'll stay sick. It's, again, a power of the mind. The mind is a very powerful thing. So this house is no different. It's a collective of all these individual psychological agonies, and it inhabits these agonies. It's a succubi of all these things it's ingesting. So if all of these people would just simply have that concept of woosah and not feed into this, the house would have nothing to feed on. So therefore, inevitably, that closet would not exist. But because there's all this turmoil going on, that is what fuels the house. It kind of takes me back to the 1986 version of Stephen King's It, when the children are down in the gutter and they're all holding hands and they're talking to each other. And as they're doing this incantation to dismiss Pennywise and kind of, make him disappear, as they're saying this, Pennywise is trying to break their concentration. So you have all these illusions behind these kids. And Billy is thinking of Georgie, and all the kids are, it's mostly Richie that's the encouraging one, and he's like, no, that's not really Georgie, don't pay attention to it. And then Bev is thinking of her dad, and then it gets to Richie, and Richie's got the werewolf hands on his back. And each time they keep telling themselves it's not real, it's only an illusion. The same thing with this house. If you will it away, it will disappear. So we get to a point where you have this exploration that tends to just get worse and worse. So now here we are, exploration number 4. Exploration number 4, we start to see the dark closet inside Holloway's head. And that is, he's never satisfied. He's always looking for the next big thrill. So by the 4th exploration, he's a little bit worried as to what they're going to find, because they have heard some growling. Everything appears to be changing spatially as they're down there. There's the creation of the staircase. The staircase seems to be never ending. The walls change. It's like a labyrinth down there. And as they try to understand and get this figured out, he decides the best option is to take a gun, because he thinks there's a monster down there. And you do hear the term monster used a couple of times, both from Tom and from Holloway. Again, I don't believe a monster ever existed. It's the monsters within their own head. So Holloway decides he's gonna go ahead and take a gun down there. In the midst of his own fears and fury, he's thinking that they are chasing this monster, and so to combat this monster, he begins shooting, thinking he is shooting the monster. Well, he ends up shooting his own teammates. So he fatally wounds one. In the midst of this, Tom is battling the house, and the kids somehow get caught up in going down there. So in an effort to save the kids, he sacrifices himself. I don't really think that was the greatest gallant effort on Tom's part. I think it just so happened that it was a trade-off, because I think at that point Tom had really given up on his life anyway. So for him it was kind of like, you know what, let me do one last good deed before I leave the earth. The final exploration is the fifth and final one. At that point, Karen has already taken the kids and left the house. You're not really sure if there's going to be a resolution or a resolve in their relationship, or if she's just left him for good and taken the kids. He's gone off to live with Reston, and they kind of are trying to figure out this whole house situation. Well, one night in a drunken stupor, he writes a letter to Karen telling her he loves her. He confesses his love for the first time that we see, inevitably. So maybe that's why this fan thought that this was somehow a romance. And he lays out all the things that he did wrong, that he shoulda, coulda, woulda done, and he says, I'm going back to the house. So he makes this final transition into this closet and deciding that he needs to figure out why this is happening, where this staircase leads. So he takes a disclosed amount of food, water, and, you know, substance to get him through this. And in this exploration, he just runs out of energy. He runs out of time. You get to this very 180, 360 moment in the book where he's got a book of matches. More or less, it's going to give him about 5.5 minutes of light because the batteries have run out. He's run out of all his supplies. And he indicates that with that light, he has a book, and he's not even sure if that's enough to get through it. And what is that book? The House of Leaves. So you're going, what? Then it indicates he read 26 pages of the book already. So if you look 26 pages in on this book, so he's read about himself. Have you ever seen that illusion of someone like sitting in front of a mirror and they look at themselves in the mirror and it just continues on and on and on, and it's like an echo of that illusion? That's what I see when I see that. What did I just read? So okay, so that's that situation. And that's not even the end of the Davidson files. So let's go to Johnny for a second. So then Johnny has the demise of his friend Lude, who we know that they've had multiple sexual encounters with various women. So there's this one particular woman who it seems as though they've both been involved with together, not at the same time, but together in the sense that they've both experienced her, and she happens to be engaged to a man who never seems to be in the picture. All of a sudden he shows up, beats the holy living lights out of Lude, puts him in the hospital. He's prescribed painkillers, becomes addicted to these painkillers. That leads him down a dark path of, you know, more drug addiction and inevitably his demise. So now Johnny's dealing with the death of his friend. That sends him on this, I don't want to call it a war path, but it's more like a do or die kind of situation, which leads him on the road to look for the house. He wants to know, does this house exist? Is it real? So his path is to lead him to Virginia and to see if these people are real, this house really stands. Somehow he ends up in Seattle. There's this really weird context of these doctors who we find out later, as the writing switches to like a more journalistic style, these people aren't real. So he's kind of battling in his own mind this false diary, because he's putting positive things that never happened just to keep his wits and just to give himself purpose for moving forward and getting to where he wants to go. So we find that now Johnny is on the road. He goes to Seattle. He then finds himself in Flagstaff, Arizona, to which he sees a concert, and it is at this concert that there is a song, and the title of the song stands out to him, and the song is called 5.5 Minute Hallway, which is also a short film you might want to check out on YouTube, which is all wrapped up into this Davidson record. But when the band comes off stage, Johnny says, hey, that title for your song, is that like a movie title? Because it sounds familiar. Starts wigging these people out because they're like, why is he all of a sudden curious about this particular title of the song? So then one of the band members pulls in his bag, he reaches in his bag and pulls out a copy of a book that just so happens to be The House of Leaves. What happened? What happened? So now you have two stories that are separate, that are now all leading to both of them have possessed a copy of this book or somehow attained a copy of this book. So we see Johnny kind of take that as a positive projection forward. He goes back to LA, and the idea and the thought process is we're leaving Johnny in kind of a state of rejuvenation, that he is going to use all of these experiences as a possible way to get clean and get healthy and just stay on that path. And he knows about the book, so you're like, okay, well, when did it get published? So you're asking yourself all of these questions. Now let's go back to the Davidson record, where we have now Karen, who's combated her own personal demons, taken on her claustrophobia, went back to the house, and she is on a mission to save Davidson. She knows that he's trapped in the closet because of the letter that she's obtained, and she has a mission to save him. And not for the reasons that you would think. It's not for love, it's for selfish reasons. At that point, she has had time to think about everything that she's done, the way she's treated him, the separation that this has caused them. And yes, does she love him? Absolutely, because she says it, she vocalizes it, and she comes to that realization. But this is more about saying, okay, this is everything you've done for me, now I'm going to return the favor and do this for you. So she takes on her claustrophobic feelings, she enters the closet not knowing if she's even going to make it out alive, and she finds him, and he's naked, alone, freezing. His temperature has dropped to pretty much the level of absolute hypothermia. She takes him to, well, she calls an ambulance, because as she's kind of coddling him and trying to bring his body temperature back to regular, she calls an ambulance, and there's a dissolution of the house. So it's not a physical dissolution where the house actually disappears around them. It's more kind of like a metaphor to say that they've been through it all now. She's gone through the fire, so to speak, to rescue him, and now the house is satisfied. So you have two people who are sitting there in the midst of what was absolute chaos, bonding back together in the house that broke them. Absolute craziness. And then the kids, of course, they come out of it, because you have Chad, who was showing signs of, like I said, mental illness. He was showing signs of tangenality, and tangenality is essentially a observation of like a speech impediment. It's where you tend to incorporate anxiety into your speech, so therefore there's like a stammer. It's said to be early signs of schizophrenia, even like onset dementia, but he's very young, so I don't think dementia would have been a factor at that point. And then Daisy, who was showing signs of echolalia. Echolalia is what they say in the psychiatric world of kind of the onset of autism or Tourette's, where, say for example, you tell her, would you like to have dinner? And so she basically regurgitates those words back to you in the form of almost like a rhetorical question. Would you like to have dinner? And so you're thinking, are you asking me? Did you hear me? Are you being a smartass? You know, what is this? And then usually within a few minutes, possibly an hour or more sometimes, it just depends on where that level is, then the child will kind of snap out of it and then respond in the correct way. Oh yes, dinner, that sounds good. What are we having? It's strange, but when the disillusionment of the house happens, then all of this kind of falls off. So now you have everyone kind of starting from scratch. But now the two people that had the idea of bonding and bringing this home together are now broken in their own way, because Will had suffered a broken pelvis and amongst other things, and now, despite the fact that she got through all of that, Karen has cancer. And so she's going through, you know, all of the chemo, and it's just it's a really sad state of affairs, but they're there for each other. The kids are appearing to be healthy and normal and vibrant once again. So I don't know, what is your take on it? It's a crazy story. I won't go through my star rating, but last time I didn't have a discussion with you as to what my stars were rating. This video will have the description as to how those stars read and what they mean. This particular book, House of Leaves, I'm giving it 4 stars. It's not for everyone. There's a lot going on in this book. There's drugs, there's sex, there's violence, there's rage, there's gore, there's psychological issues galore. So it's definitely not for everyone, but it's got something for everyone. The thing with this book though is it does have a rare form about it. You can read it over and over again, and I think every time you read it, you will have a different experience, because you can read the footnotes, you can read just the German, you know, there's so many ways you can take it. So let's pick our new madness. 50 books now in the pile. New book will be The Collector, John Fowles. It's over here. I'm gonna cause a big old tumble of books. All right, The Collector. This is gonna be an interesting one. I've heard some crazy things about this. I think this is gonna be a psychological horror book too. We'll see, I don't know, I'm guessing. I'm gonna leave you with a thought. I love this quote. Our minds influence the key activity of the brain, which then influences everything: perception, cognition, thoughts, feelings, personal relationships. They're all a projection of you. Deepak Chopra. Until next time, I'll see you real soon. Take care. The Collector. Bye.